Fuck off, man. Let me talk. And like, if you didn't bring any blues with you, we'd make sure we make some for
Alan Hendrix was born on November the 27th, 1942, in Seattle, Washington. Hendrix, originally raised by his mother Lucille, later went to live with his father Al, who then changed his first son's name to James Marshall Hendrix.
Growing up in Seattle with Jimmy was pretty fun for me. Jimmy was in charge of babysitting me while my father was working, late hours. There was a secure feeling about Jimmy. It seemed to be like he was warm and he was like, fatherly to me. And I always felt secure that everything was all right. And it was just me, Jimmy, and my dad living at home by ourselves. He was in charge of me. And sometimes I saw Jimmy more than I saw my father. Jimmy had a very mellow personality, He had this essence about him that was like really different. He never hollered, he never cussed, he never got upset. He was always thinking about music. And he treated me the same way. He never yelled at me. I got one black eye through my whole childhood, and I think that's pretty good for a little brother. Jimmy was shy because he was always thinking. You could put Jimmy in a room with a lot of people, and he couldn't be social because he had music racing through his brain like a freight train. You know what I'm talking about? And sometimes you say, Jimmy, are you paying attention to me? And you go, wait a minute, there's this note coming through. You know what I'm talking about?
I grew up with Jimi Hendrix. I was 13. We were going to middle school, and we used to hang out together. He was a good friend of my brother's, basically. He'd tell jokes all the time. He loved comics. And a hell of a nice guy. You know what I'm saying? But very laid back and shy. Very shy. People talked about him a lot because he was so different, But he was just a cool kind of guy, man, you know what I mean?
Growing up with Jimmy, when he first started to play guitar, was like, it was strange for me because Jimmy he was into sounds. He would stretch a rubber band across the bed. We had this brass bed, with the poles and stuff like that. And he would stretch strings and rubber bands, and he would make all these sounds and plucking sounds. And finally, my father, came across this old ukulele with one string on it. And then pretty soon he finally got a guitar, from a hawk shop for $5. And that's when he really started to, pass by the sports, pass by the social activity of all his friends in the area, and start whamming on that guitar. He had a lot of friends, but when Jimmy started playing guitar, the friends kind of was jealous of Jimmy because, they used to run around together and play baseball and stuff. And here's Jimmy, all he wants to do is pluck on that guitar. I remember this one story where me and Jimmy were at the park, and Jimmy's playing guitar on the hill, in some bushes. And his friends came along and said, Jimmy, come and play, man, come and play. And Jimmy said, no, I want to play guitar. And they kept saying, come on, Jimmy, come on. And so then they kind of gathered around a little bit. And they said, let me see your guitar, right? And so Jimmy said, okay, because, Jimmy was humble. Jimmy was like a really good guy. So he said, okay, here. And so they took off running across the field. And Jimmy was so upset, man. He was chasing them guys, you could see the dust, and you guys were teasing him, passing the guitar back and forth from each other.
Jimmy always had his guitar with him. When I first knew him, he had a Dan Electro guitar, and I had a Dan Electro bass. That was kind of the bottom of the line, but it played, and it was electric, and it was great. And he would always carry that with him, slung over his back, no case, just his guitar. And you know, he was just wherever he was always playing with that guitar, always working on new licks, trying to come up with something new.
My brother played keyboards, and I played guitar, and Jimmy played guitar. That's how we struck up a friendship. You know, we used to play together daily. I mean, you know, write songs, drank wine together. You know, did things that kids actually did, you know what I'm saying? When we were small, go fishing, you know, sleep in the parks, and, you know, and just have a good time doing a lot of things that kids did when we were small, you know, play cowboys and Indians, I mean, you know. And when we used to jam together, we used to just exchange licks, and, you know, he'd show me songs, and we'd write songs together. And I'd show him stuff that I learned, say, Jimmy, hey, look at this, check this out, Jimmy, what do you think? And he'd show me some of the things that he had created, and we'd jam daily, on a daily basis, you know. We had paper routes together, you know, we'd take our guitars, little acoustic guitars.
Jimmy never had any guitar lessons. Jimmy heard it. Jimmy heard a music that floated through the air, and, you know, and he wanted to grab it, he wanted to bring it down. And that's the only time that he heard the music, and he wanted it, and he reached for it, and he attained it.
Jimmy never took any lessons, you know, just gathered stuff from around the neighborhood, different cats. I'd play, and he'd play, and Randy and Purnell would play, and he'd pick up all this shit and add his own flavor to it, and he was a monster. Jimmy was playing bass, though, on a 6-string guitar years ago, before basses were, I mean, you know, really out.
Jimmy's early musical influences were shaped from listening to local Seattle bands such as the Sharps and the Dynamics. Music historian Peter Blecker has carried out significant research into Jimmy's early musical years.
Prior to getting his guitar, he had already been a fan of the local bands. He went and saw bands like the Sharps, the Dynamics, the Frantics, Little Bill and the Blue Notes, and the Dave Lewis Combo was probably his favorite band. And so he went to the dances, he went to the shows in the armory halls and the community centers, places like that. So we know that he had an interest in music there. The next important thing I think that happened in Jimmy's life was that around the summer of 1957, some local concert promoters decided to throw matinee shows for teenagers. So groups like Little Richard and the Upsetters came through town that year, and Hank Ballard and the Midnighters came through town, and Bill Doggett. And Jimmy and his pals got to go see those bands at these afternoon matinee shows, and you know, it's obvious that those bands influenced him.
He was always, you know, playing Elvis Presley's songs with air guitar, you know. But we call it broom guitar because he would take the broom and he would practice and think that he was Elvis, and he would do Hound Dog and Heartbreak Hotel for me, you know. I used to go to sleep to those songs, you know, when I was a kid.
September 1970, James Marshall Hendrix died, leaving the world to mourn the loss of rock's finest guitarist and most explosive performer. This is the story about the life and career of a flamboyant star. From his early beginnings to his innovative albums, such as Are You Experienced and Electric Ladyland. A story told by those who knew him best.
Jimmy was very, very unique. You know, I've heard stories where people came to look at him almost as you know, like a sideshow attraction, but soon found out that he was a guy who was doing acrobatics on a guitar, you know, nobody had seen before.
He made those records. He did what he wanted to do. That was his vision. Those records came out sounding the way he wanted them to sound.
Was nobody like him. Nobody. There were a lot of guitar players, but they weren't like Jimmy, you know.
And he was so unique at it. He was an original. He was original. He didn't copy anybody. He was his own self. And that's why he became successful, because he was unique. And there was nobody like him that ever came along.